chapter 7. Let me just recap chapter 7, that portion, and a few notes here. So last week we looked at the Feast of Tabernacles tradition, and part of that was this pouring of water. They went down to the pool of Siloam every day, and then on the final day they went around like 6 times and marched around the altar at the temple and poured out the water. So that has application to when Jesus says, whoever is thirsty, let him come to me and drink, and all. That was part of that setup there. Talked about the idea of drinking and how it relates in drinking and water in the scriptures, and how thirst is figuratively alluded to there, implied. We talked about the possible scriptures that Jesus may have been considering in his statement when he said, as the scripture said, out of his being shall flow rivers of living water. And he said, there is no distinctive, critical text you can say, pinpoints and say this is it. It's actually maybe kind of a collection of scriptures, or maybe one more based on the book of Nehemiah that seems to more reference what Jesus was talking about, but it was not a clear, precise one that we can allude to. We looked at the sovereign protection of Jesus, where it says, with no one laid hands on him, and all that time. Remember, there was all this time he's just teaching, and people are just getting frustrated. Some of the group, like, somebody do something, somebody stop him, and no, they weren't able to. Talked about how the guards, they had no reply when the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all, when they sent out the guards to go grab Jesus, it's like, why didn't you get him? And what did they say? No one ever spake like this before, it just dazed them or whatever, knocked them. Anyway, we also spent time on Nicodemus' interjection about wanting to hear Jesus out, and how the other Pharisees assumed he was like some kind of a Jesus sympathizer, right? Okay, and there was all when they said, see that there no prophet comes out of Galilee. Well, there were actually like at least five of them, including Elijah, Elisha, Jonah, Nahum, and somebody else in there. But anyway, it was, so they were just maybe in their enragement, they just couldn't understand or see what they were saying.
And then they never bothered to find out he was born in Bethlehem.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't care to research it. Sometimes you can be, there's that, what's the expression?
I was reading in Matthew, and it's like, oh, this guy comes from Bethlehem. Like, so somewhere along the way they did, but
yes.
In this chapter they didn't.
Yeah, certainly Herod was knew about it, right? He found out. But the idea, you were saying about they were born, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to say something. I lost my
You say
train of thought.
been in the temple records and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, they would have had it. They were so, fastidious meticulous on genealogy and stuff, that more so than probably, 23andMe. But anyway, it was very, very important to them. So let's go ahead and get started on today's reading. And we're into what is called the, in Latin, pericope adulteri. And it basically means, pericope kind of come from Greek, but it's into Latin. It means to cut around, like we're doing an excision, an extraction of something. So it's the story, you could call it a story, the passage of the adulteress. You may have it in your topical heading in your Bible as the story of the adulterous woman or something like that. So that's pericope adulteri is what you typically find it in a sort of a Bible dictionary sort of a thing. All right, so what I'd like to do is go ahead and read, and I'll take it around the back way this time. I'll go with Nolan and Marianne. We'll go ahead and start reading the portion that deals with the proper. Go ahead.
They went each to his own house. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. So what do you say?
But when they heard it, sorry.
6.
Okay. This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground.
But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more."
Like that. Caleb, are you gonna read too? You good at reading? Okay, so you'd be reading the next one. We're not there yet. Okay, so what I wanted to do is an overview of this section here. This particular reading you will find in most of, if you have an ESV or an NIV or something like that, it'll probably be in little brackets or something like that. It'll be something that identifies it as a section to itself with some kind of commentation about it, and the notes below there saying it's not in the early manuscripts or something to that effect. So it does have kind of a lot of debate as to whether this belongs, certainly in the Gospel of John, even if it's canonical, meaning it belongs in the scriptures, because it does, we like to have a lot of veracity or proof or legitimacy that something really is canonical as we see it verified in multiple copies and all. And the thing is, it doesn't occur in what we would call the early manuscripts, the earliest manuscripts, which are considered to be the closest to the original source, and they seem to be missing from there. But it doesn't mean that it's not, that what we have in the early ones is actually the best ones either. So some debate in there. But part of the reason is because, simply because it shows up when you read it, it just shows up as an interruption when you read it. For instance, if we go to John 7, here, go to John 7. Let me just jump here. And verse 50, starting with Nicodemus. Nicodemus, who had gone to him before and who was one of them, said to them, "Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does?" They replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee." Jump to 12. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." It sort of continues. If you read it that way, it just flows smoother. Typically, it just flows smoother. Historically, this passage has also kind of floated around in some of the manuscripts that are out there, so it hasn't always been in this particular spot. It's not to say that it's not legitimate or that it shouldn't be there, but there are reasons why it is considered that maybe it's not the right place. If we look to it, we'll read a couple passages in Luke here in just a moment here, but some of the elements, the Greek language is oftentimes it's looked at a little bit differently than what John typically uses. The style is different, but then again, people on the other side say, no, there's some terms in there that we can see that John also uses that is peculiar to him that nobody else shares. But we'll get into it a little bit more in just a moment. None of the early church fathers discussed it in their writings of John, so they sort of have a little bit of, disbelief in it.
They only brought the woman. I mean,
We're not into that yet.
We
Hold
don't-
on to that.
Are
We're
we
not
gonna
talking
get
about the
into
story
that?
yet. We will get into that. Very
okay,
good.
that's,
Yeah.
I just was wondering. Thank
Okay.
you, I'm not stealing thunder, I'm
Thank
just
you,
asking.
thank you, thank you. But the text does seem a little bit more suited to the Synoptic Gospels. That's my opinion. But again, I'm not saying, I have no ruling authority over it, okay? It does bounce around, as I said. If you refer back to John's passage, it says they each went to his own house is what the way we started with. That's the last verse of chapter 7. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him. He sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman and so forth. So just that little bit there, that first couple of verses in there, I wanted to read a couple of passages from like Luke and just see if he sort of sensed some of the same similarity of some things. If you will read Caleb 47 to 48, it's Luke 19, Abby, you'll be reading the next.
He was teaching daily in the temple, and the chief priests and the scribes and the principal men of the people were seeking to destroy him, but they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were hanging on his word.
What was the first thing you read? And he was teaching daily in the temple. It sort of connects with that aspect. The chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees. This is the only spot. If John never mentions the scribes other than this one single verse in chapter 1 in here. So that's why there's some doubting as to whether or not this is really part of that belongs in John. Chapter 20, Abby, verses 1 and 2 were allowed.
One day, as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel, the chief priests and scribes with the elders came up and said to him, "Tell us, authority you do these things? Or who it is that gave you this authority?
Right, so again, it's that same kind of style of here he is teaching in the temple, and you've got these Pharisees, scribes approaching him and all. And then one more time, 21, Adam, if you read 21, 37, 38, this is where a lot of people think it really belongs associated with this passage here. Go ahead. 21, 37, 38.
During the day he was teaching in the temple, but in the evening he would go out and spend the night on what is called the Mount of Olives. Then all the people would come early in the morning to hear him in the temple.
Right. That sounds like, again, from the book of John. They went each to his own house. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. It's just a similarity associated with some of the passages that we've read in Luke. Maybe it belongs more in Luke. We don't know. We're not going to make a big argument about it. I just want to go over and give you some of the arguments for why it may not be original to the Gospel of John. But there are also textual variations within the manuscript, within this whole passage itself, and there are other reasons why maybe it should be part of John's Gospel. For instance, we had just read in John 7:24, do not judge by appearances, but judge with righteous judgment. And John 8:15, we're not there yet. You judge according to the flesh, I judge no one. So there's a lot of elements of judgment in the book of John, especially 7 and 8. And in this passage here, it's going to be about judging. Are you going to judge this woman, basically? So, again, I just want to give you a little bit of, it doesn't mean it doesn't belong in the Gospel of John. It's just, we don't have a good, really, foundation to say it belongs here or belongs elsewhere. Okay? But stylistically, I think we can easily believe the story happened.
Do you have Matthew 21, 37 through 32?
Is that 31?
Read it backwards.
Yeah.
Is it 31 and 32?
Let me correct that when I get there.
Okay, and what is MT under?
Matthew.
Yeah, Matthew and Mark. Mark and Matthew.
Matthew. Exodus. All right. So, as we go through here past that. Okay. But I'm telling you, have you ever seen a movie or a story about Jesus' life that does not contain this event? I don't think you find, you would just feel like you've been cheated out of something here, because it just is a story that is just so iconic with the gospel, right? When you see the story, especially in obviously the Gospel of John here, but in any movie about the gospel where they portray Jesus' life, you're going to pretty much see this story here. It's just part of the story. And why is that the case? Just thinking about the story itself. Why is this story so much a part of just every rendition of a film story of Jesus or something like that?
Well, it definitely showed how different he was than how things were going up to that point with the law, and that, according to the Pharisees, they had all rights to stone this woman.
Yes.
And so, I mean, it was just very radical to
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
And I think it underscores the fact that, not one of us is sinless.
Good point. Yeah, both very good points. And it just shows, it's just this grace of Jesus in the midst of these evil sort of people who want to just execute this, with their way of their hypocrisy and so forth. And they're this incredible antagonists who try to, righteously they're self-righteous, and they're humiliated by Jesus' words, and they're exposed for who they really are, right?
Wouldn't they normally just have stoned her right where she was at?
No,
And not
no,
brought her?
No, not in this case here. Certainly should not have, because there was Roman rule, and we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. You are so jumping the gun; it's amazing. But you're doing good. I'll give you extra credit.
I've got all the questions.
But
Good.
in Old Testament times, sure, they could have. They would have brought her out and marched her out and so forth. But in this case, they were under Roman domination, so they couldn't just do that. But that's part of the challenge that they want to put before Jesus.
They had to bring her before the Romans? I mean, who were they bringing her forward to? I mean,
Well, it depends. The Romans would just have said, "We don't care, but you're not going to." Probably, I'll just say, I'm sure the Romans couldn't have cared less in one sense about it, but they would probably refuse them the right to stone her, because to them they didn't care. It wasn't a big thing to them. But some things they may turn over to the Jews for their own law to do with, but oftentimes I think the Romans probably would have seen through what this was about. Okay, so as we go through, we look at the idea. Let's start in the first verse, 7:53, actually, back at the very end of chapter 7. They start with, they went each to his own house. And I sort of thought, in one sense, we're still in the Feast of Tabernacles, we're at the very end of it, but they still have their booths. So the idea they went to their own house sort of lends me a little dubiousness as to whether or not this is part of the original part of John. But anyway, because remember, we're having huge crowds coming into out-of-town crowds. This is a feast, a big feast, Jewish feast. It's at the end of the event. And 8:1 it says, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now, we already read in Luke that the Mount of Olives in a couple of places there. This should be the first and only time that John uses this term. It just doesn't seem to be big in his mind, so to speak, the Mount of Olives, but as it is in some of the synoptics. So that's why, again, I question it in this particular spot here. And it's very unusual to John to add the timing phrase early in the morning. We just don't see that much often, especially when he's at the temple. Remember his other temple visit when he goes in there to cleanse the temple? You don't hear anything about the time there. Or also when he heals the man, the invalid. Remember that? There's no question about the timing there.
A comment.
Yep.
Maybe you and I can talk afterward, but the commentaries that I've read also do say that it jumps around. And one commentator said that it looks like it could have our earlier manuscript could have been in Hebrews as well.
Oh yeah,
This
yeah.
passage, so
Yeah.
I didn't know if we had any Hebrews left.
I didn't hear that one, but maybe that's true. I don't know. Yeah, but it does float around. Yeah, it's not consistently in the Gospel of John.
But it's somewhere in there.
It could be in Luke or something like that. The people, whoever they decided, let's just settle it here. Let's put it here. Flip a coin. I don't know, but at any rate.
Was it not found at all in the early
Right,
manuscripts?
what we call the early manuscripts, right?
But that we only had partial manuscripts, right? Because, we never had.
We don't have, there's very few
early.
we would call an entire New Testament. No, you have to probably Codex Vaticanus or something, Sinaiticus and so forth. So, but I didn't want to get into that right now. Okay, so we look also, and then it says, all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Now, we have just been looked at in John 7, right? And we looked at all these different groups. What were some of the groups we looked at? Remember? The crowd.
Brothers, Jews.
Remember? And so we had the brothers, right? And you had the disciples, who really aren't even mentioned until John chapter 9. But the idea here is we've got basically this crowd. We've got the Jerusalemites, remember them, the people of Jerusalem. And then you have the elites, the Pharisees, Sadducees, and so forth. Those are the Jews, so who are called the Jews, okay? And so it says in this verse, all the people came to him and he sat down and taught them. And I said all like that because it really wasn't a very uniform style crowd there, okay? We just read there was a lot of division in the people groups there, right? And in fact, in 7:43 to 44, let me read that. It says, so there was a division among the people over him. Some of them wanted to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him. So we see there was a lot of contention, a lot of conflict in here. So I just don't get the idea where it says in verse, if we read verse 8:2 there, early in the morning he came to the temple, people came to him and sat down and taught them. It just seems like they're all sitting around singing Kumbaya or something. It just has that sensation of a feeling to me. So that's why I have a little heartburn thinking this really belongs spot right here. Again, it's just my own opinion on that, but it's just no big deal. Anyway, let's continue on that. In 8:3 to 5, it says, the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and placing her in the midst, okay? So as I said, John never mentioned scribes before, except for this one instant, and they're much more common in the Synoptic Gospels, that title there. And we're told, of course, that the Pharisees bring a woman caught in adultery and placed her in the midst of Jesus. It was a teaching class, okay? Adultery is, of course, presumably, unless it's rape, a consensual act, right? What was your question to me earlier? First question.
Where's the man?
There you go, okay. So this is sort of like, where is the man, right? I mean, they just bring one party, there's gotta be two guilty parties when you come to this point, right? So it sort of obviously shows they have a chauvinistic attitude and their hypocrisy in the whole affair. Probably, I suspect it was more of a setup, it was more of a trap kind of a thing, that they wanted this particular incident to occur. They wanted to bring this challenge to Jesus. So I think it was a setup. Can't prove it, but I think you just get the feeling from the intensity of what they are going to say that they are virulent against this person. They want to use it against Jesus, right? Anybody have any opinion about that?
No, the only thing I've heard about this was that since it hopped around a lot and it doesn't fit in the exact same points that you're making now, is that the best that I think I read this out of this point. I think I actually read out at least when he was interviewing Winland, Craig, or Dan Walsh or something, and he said, "Well, we don't know exactly what happened. We think something did happen, but that's as good as we can get. Something that happened like it fits all the context of Jesus, and we just don't know."
Yeah, we do not give him more details than that.
Yeah.
Everything else is sort of speculation. Some things you can kind of read into it and sort of pull out. You think it makes sense, yeah.
Well, when Aaron, remember a couple weeks ago, was talking about the whole test for the woman, that, like.
Oh,
she
yeah,
was
with the red heifer or
She was
whatever.
unfaithful and she had to drink the holy water and all that.
Yeah.
Was that, because would that be with a woman who is like suspected of having adultery? Like would that be what they were still doing, having them go through all those courses with the priest and drinking the water and all that? Or is that
Good
all,
question.
like,
I'll leave that for
not?
extra credit.
I
That's a
mean,
very good question.
No stoning was mentioned right there.
Right.
I mean, when was that starting to happen? Like, why straight to the stoning?
Well, I think
Like,
if you could prove, I mean, if you could prove it, that guy, the person in the red heifer incident back in Numbers was like, I just have this feeling my wife has been unfaithful to me.
Okay.
I want you to prove it.
So they weren't like caught in the act.
Exactly,
So they're-
right.
this is like this supposedly this woman. There's no question
Caught,
whether the adultery.
caught,
It's funny.
red-handed.
Her comment actually made my brain go to like, hey, these guys, it's been a long time since then. Maybe the Jewish leaders are used to let's just go straight to stoning at this point. They're just so used to let's skip all the
Right, all the
laws.
formalities,
Yeah,
right?
like,
Just get through it.
after these hundreds of years, they're more prone to go straight to stoning. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't the point of the entire exercise from the scribes and the Pharisees, their thought, the entire point was they know stoning is illegal in Rome, but they also know that the law requires it. So they bring it to Jesus because no matter what he does, it's wrong.
Yes.
We're gonna get there.
That's the trick.
Exactly right.
That's-
Hold on to that
That's why
thought.
it's a trick.
We are going to get further to that subject
The other
momentarily.
thing is that she may be preparing herself to commit this sin, but never got into it.
Well, I mean, they say caught her in the act, so I can only assume. I don't know how far would it, be rather strange to be guys underneath the bed waiting for things to happen at a certain point or something, or they're just eavesdropping, and then they frog march this half-naked woman out or something. I don't know. It's again, that's speculation. We don't know. Yeah. They evidently, Jesus did not dispute the charge. Let's put it that way. Okay. All right. So the Pharisees were, they were not interested in even-handed justice. I think that certainly shows because the guy wasn't there, right? They just only wanted to put Jesus on the horns of a dilemma. We'll get to that momentarily, and which speaks all the more to their hypocrisy and their wickedness. It wasn't justice. It wasn't trying to mete out some sort of, look, she has really disobeyed the law of Moses. This is such an insult to it. We got to do this different. They just wanted to trap Jesus is really what the point was. So in verse 4, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" That's sort of like the attitude, really, it's that you is an emphatic there. What do you think about this? Give us your opinion. So they addressed Jesus as a teacher, right? Because that's what he's been doing. That's certainly an appropriate term there. According to the law, how many witnesses were required for a crime to charge somebody? Minimum of two or three, basically, at least, which you'd want. So they certainly had, supposedly, the numbers in there. Deuteronomy 19:15. Miss Abigail, do you want to read that? you want to catch the next one? I'll catch this one, okay. So he says, a single witness shall not suffice against the person for any crime or for any wrong in contention with any offense that has been committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. So at least 2 of these guys, they presumably were eyewitnesses, right? So it says in verse 5, Moses commanded us to stone such women. That was based upon Deuteronomy 22:23. It's debatable whether you had to stone her, basically, or, anyway, I'm not worried about it. They just wanted to lick their chops, and the idea was, what do you say about this? So what's the predicament? What does Jesus face in this issue? You kind of brought it up.
Either the law of Rome, he's gonna violate the law of Rome.
Okay.
Or he's gonna violate the law of Moses.
Very good. But there's more than that too. But that's basically a very black and white way of looking at things. This is absolutely correct. What else would be at stake?
Pretty much everything he's been teaching up to this point.
Which was,
Forgiveness.
forgiveness, right? And all this compassion. Where's the compassion you have? The idea here is that if he condemns her, okay, sure, go ahead, stone her. She deserves it, right? The problem, and then they subsequently lynch her by stoning, it would turn the people against Jesus. Now this is what they're trying to do, build a wedge in there. He would be instantly discredited with his message. They saw him as one who preached forgiveness, love your enemies, right? It would crater everything he said about compassion and broken and disreputable to bring to restoration people who were broken. His announcement of a life-transforming power of a new birth. What good is it if you falter at one sin and then you're executed? So he would appear to be a hypocrite if he changed messaging now to, kill her, I'm up for Moses, And it would discredit his message with gross inconsistency, because all of a sudden, when Abigail, if you'll read the next passage, get ready on that. It's 21, 31 to 32. Make that a 1.
Make that a 1? Okay.
Is it 21?
31 to 32.
You want to
That's
start
chapter 21. but-
Chapter 21,
Yeah.
verse 31.
Read that just in a second here. But the idea is gross inconsistency, because he's offering salvation to tax collectors and prostitutes, and yet for this one woman here who commits supposedly maybe a single act of adultery, kill her, Go ahead.
Okay. Which of the 2 did his father's will? They said, the first. Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, tax collectors and prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you didn't believe him. Tax collectors and prostitutes did believe him. But you, when you saw it, didn't even change your minds then and believe him.
Right, so he's talking to basically the Pharisees. We didn't cover the entire narrative there, but the idea is that this is the story of the 2 sons, which son did his father's will. And he's saying, basically at the end conclusion of it, tax collectors and prostitutes will go into heaven before you do, or at least into the kingdom of God, right? Which would certainly be in life and the spirit now. Anyway, but the second part, as you mentioned there, John, it would pit Jesus against the Romans, who would see Jesus usurping their sole authority for capital punishment cases, right? In fact, this was even used by the Jews in at Jesus' crucifixion. John 18:31, Mr. Brent.
18:31?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Pilate therefore said to them, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. The Jews said to him, we are not permitted to put anyone to death.
Right, so they're going to use Rome's law against Pilate himself, You can't do this. You can't let him go. You got to take care of this. And so he was forced into it, basically. Interesting. So he's got those issues. He's got credibility, complete credibility issues with the populace on his compassion message, and the issue of the Roman going against the Roman law. And then, but if he simply does forgive her, well, now what's the message there that's being portrayed?
You don't have to obey Moses' law.
Yeah, exactly. He'd be disavowing, he'd be denouncing Moses' law. He'd be found in contempt, right? Where's all this stuff about the sinless Son of God, kind of like who you represent? So he would be basically considered like lawless in that regard. So this dilemma technique, it was used multiple times by the Pharisees and stuff. You may remember, for instance, in Mark 10:2, Peggy?
And the Pharisees came up in order to test him and ask, Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?
Okay, stop there, but the idea that, to test them, this idea of, is it lawful, is it good? You're gonna support Moses, or you're gonna support the idea of, if your wife disappoints you, get her out of the house? Matthew 22:15-18.
Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites?
All right, so he smells it a mile off. You're not gonna fool Jesus. But these people, they just sort of, it's like watching, Wile E. Coyote chase after the Roadrunner kind of thing or something. There's also, I held off putting it up there, but, no, it is there, in fact, Matthew 22, no, that's what you just read. Matthew 22:23-29, the same day Sadducees came to him, if there's no resurrection, and they asked him, remember, this woman, she had been married, she married one guy, and then he died, and then she married his brother, and he died, and so forth like that, and then whose wife is she going to be in the resurrection? And Jesus said, you are wrong, because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. And the idea was, again, it's more this idea, let's trip him up, let's give him a question he can't seem to answer right. So anyway, in 8:6 it says, they said to test him that they might have some charge to bring against him, which we just discussed. But Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. Wouldn't you like to know what? What did he do with this thing on the ground, right? So obviously, the motives are exposed. They're not interested in advice or guidance or recommendations from Jesus. It's all about testing, about challenging him, right? About tripping him up. We do not know what Jesus wrote. We don't know whether he wrote something or whether he drew something or whether he just doodled, okay? There's some thoughts about it, some good, I think, rational thoughts, reasonable thoughts about it, but we don't actually know. Some people thought, well, maybe you wrote down the 10 Commandments. That's a lot to write down in a short period of time there. But it's possible, maybe more particularly the ones, the 7th and the 10th, do not commit adultery and you shall not covet. Those would be appropriate, applicable in this case. Or Exodus 23:1-2, interesting passage there, Cindy.
Do not spread false reports. Do not help a wicked man by being a malicious witness. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd.
Right, so malicious witness, somebody who just sort of joins in and, maybe he has a charge against the person as well, but it's with malicious intent. And I think that's the idea here. It certainly fits one who could be a false witness, but in being malicious, it's also one testifying they're not interested in justice, okay? They really have an evil intent, oftentimes from a self-interest motive, to inflict harm under the guise of righteousness, something like that. They're not really interested in making sure justice gets done. They're just in it for spite or for gloating or for something of that effect like that.
I wonder how many people ran over and looked to see what he wrote.
Yeah.
I
I know.
Yeah.
Somebody took a picture at least.
And truly, if they had wanted justice, they would have brought the man as well, because
Oh yeah, absolutely right.
that's
right.
supposed to be
Right.
the case.
Right. Maybe he was writing some of the sins down to the accusers. We don't know. Who knows? It'd be nice to know. Perhaps, maybe it's just as simple as he just was delaying, a stalling for time. Not that he needed it, but he wanted them to have it, to consider themselves. What were they doing? This is something maybe as simple as that. He's just holding off, letting it grind in their mind what they were doing.
I've always taken it as just a complete lack of concern. This doesn't worry me.
Yeah, okay, exactly. Yeah, I mean,
this is,
it does
you're
sort of
making a big deal out of something that doesn't really concern
Well,
me.
it's not that it's not a big deal, but it's not something that I'm getting involved in, right?
Yep.
Essentially, and we're gonna get to that in just a moment. It is sort of a dispassionate way of doing it. It doesn't show a lot of passion in it and emotion, so to speak, in it. And I think that's part of the technique that he's using in here. I do agree with you.
I think if people would have looked, and I think they did, and if it would have been anything that messed with Jesus and what he did, it would be known. And people would say, look what he wrote.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that type of thing.
Maybe
That's why
so.
it might not have been
Right,
anything.
that's scripture, right, I mean.
Yeah.
Right, I don't know. Be nice to know, Bill, hopefully we'll ask him.
And the people that brought him were afraid of Jesus because they were thinking he was gonna take over their place and they would no longer have the.
Yeah, there's a threat to their
Yeah,
position,
they-
right?
I
Their
mean, they
status.
were threatened and
Yeah.
they were trying to do whatever they could
Right,
to.
to block that, to prevent that, right?
Right.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. They had-
And the thing is that here we are, how many years later, and we realize how ignorant they were
Yeah.
instead of as wise men that they thought they were.
And I'll add to your comment there that when you look at it, the idea of we look at regimes like North Korea or somebody like that, and they fear Jesus, they fear the Christian message, they ban it, they won't allow it in because they realize and understand the threat that it is to their position. So it's even today, right? All right, so important to remember, Jesus' purpose while in his earthly ministry here was not to render legal judicial judgments, okay? In other words, make sentences or rulings about things that deal with the common, in our lives here, in earthly affairs. Jesus was not going to become a magistrate or a judge, and he emphasized that, okay? For instance, in Luke 12, 13 to 15.
Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions."
Right, so when he says there, "Man, who made me judge or arbitrator over you?" The you there is plural, it's y'all.
Yeah.
Maybe the guy had his brother with him right there and then, I don't know. But it's sort of basically speaking in the plural form that he is saying, I am not your judge. You want that kind of ruling, you go to the arbiter who does that stuff. I'm not involving myself with these earthly affairs right here. I have a mission to do, and I'm not going to get it messed up, compromised, or violated in any way. So the man was only pursuing material benefits and not spiritual rebirth. And so Jesus came to bring, of course, true riches, right? Not going to be involved in earthly legal disputes. It's not my job, okay? He essentially is telling man, seek out a judgment via the magistrate, or going to the courts, having an earthly magistrate rule on it. And there are several verses, they're short, so I'll read them here. Verses in John where Jesus is not here to judge, at least for his first advent. John 3:17, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but or to judge the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. John 8:15, we'll read that probably next week. You judge according to the flesh, I judge no one. And then John 12:47, if anyone hears my words and does not keep them, I do not judge him, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. So we see Jesus' mission here. However, does it conflict with a couple of other verses? Okay, I'm just going to read them to you. I didn't put them. Okay, John 5:22. Larry.
For the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son.
Oh, that's like a complete contradiction, right? Okay, how about John 9:39, John?
Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind."
For judgment I came into this world? Sounds contradictory a little bit. So what do you think about that?
What's the context around it?
Okay, how would you see it in terms of what he's saying here versus the previous set of verses that we read?
Yeah, so, it's an honest question. What's the context in John 5 and 9? Is it talking about alluding to his second coming?
Right. That I think is part of the aspect of it. So I think that is correct. It's more of like the idea of the Father, he has given all judgment to the Son. That's looking forward to his second advent. I do agree with you there. I think that's the way that came in. And I think when we say, for judgment I came into this world, it doesn't have to mean like, okay, you're going here, you're going there. It's more or less the ability to be able to put information out there that will separate people, that shows them who they really are, whether they're following light or following darkness, really is what that means. It doesn't mean necessarily I'm rendering a judgment on you.
Yeah, I guess I've always seen that passage as meaning then his life is a judgment.
Yeah,
The
right,
rest of us.
right. Just as he comes, how you treat him, right? You judge yourself in that way. Yeah, okay. So we'll get into chapter 9 business later on in our studies. John chapter 8, 7 through 8. I'll read that. Going through the text here. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. So the Pharisees are continuing this pressure tactic, okay? We're waiting, Jesus, whether it's Jeopardy or whatever. They want an answer. And Jesus basically just kind of ignores them for a bit. And I think, again, it's part of this tactic to kind of build up and to make them frustrated and to help them understand more like you're not going to just whip around the Son of Man as you want and as you think you can do. He's in charge, not you. They probably feel like they got him cornered and he doesn't want to answer. He wants to evade the question, right? So Jesus continues his writing in an almost just anticlimactic way. It's just dispassionate. It's not really, it's like he's not engaged in the issue, right?
It's the perfect answer, though.
Well, yes, indeed it is.
If you are being judged by a jury of your peers, they're going to decide if you're guilty or innocent. I wonder how many people in that 12 jury.
You got that, Cheryl? Yes, exactly.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah. It's, you look at sin, it's really thought, word, and deed. When you get down to it, not just
absolutely.
deed. Right? So Jesus, after that awful silence, Jesus stands and speaks to them. "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." I'm telling you, this is one of the most well-known passages of the scriptures, I think. And when is it used? How do people use this as a shield or use this as, protection?
Everybody sins and I'm not as bad as somebody else.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think you've heard this from people who are not believers, basically. Yeah, well, if you're sinless, then you can throw the first stone at me. But it's the idea that don't judge me, right? Which comes back to John chapter 7, verse 1. "Do not judge, lest you yourself be judged," right? So
Also makes you think, how many people in a crowd, okay, they say, nobody wants to be the first one.
yes.
About
At
that,
that point, stand up like, good Lord.
And then you kind of look around and you go, yeah, he knows what I did, and she knows, well, but, the older ones, that's what gets me is that it says that the older ones left first.
Yeah.
Well, they had time to do more sin.
That's right, that's right.
Hold on to your thought about the idea of, I don't want to be the first one, okay, hang on to
Yeah.
that. But basically, it's like he just blows the entire thing out of the water here, what they're arguing, and it's just, the ultimate mic drop, okay? If you're without sin, you do it, okay? But of course, none of them are without sin, so he challenges them.
Except him.
Except him, that's quite right.
Yeah, that's not used in politics today at all.
No.
Oh, brother.
Who's in office and what, yeah, it's daily that's used.
Yeah, right.
I can tell you, you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I
Right.
can't.
Mhm. So, what you mentioned, Peggy, about be the first one, Jesus, in Deuteronomy 17, 6 through 7, let's see what the requirement was. Bill, 17, 6 to 7.
"On the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses, the one who is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. The hand of the witnesses shall be first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. So you shall purge the evil from your midst."
Right. So, if you witnessed it, you were the one doing the charge, you were the one that was going to throw the rock. Okay, you're going to throw the stone. But you couldn't also be guilty of the same crime. I mean, that would be, that'd be impossible and incredible to think that you could do that, because you get stoned too, right? So obviously, but on the other hand, no one is obviously sinless of all sin in order to execute the crime. So you may have seen somebody do some terrible crime, in this case adultery. You may not have been guilty of it in particular yourself doing it, but in other words, but no one could, in other words, you could be guilty of other sins, but not necessarily adultery. But the adultery is the only one we're bringing up right now. Whereas you may have been charged of embezzlement or something like that, but we're not talking about embezzlement, we're talking about adultery right now. So maybe you could have gotten out of that adultery charge, but still, you know, we're all guilty of crimes when you get down to it, right?
And
no one is
if
sinless.
if you thought it, you committed it.
Exactly right. Now,
So,
what commandment would that be?
thank you. Now you're turning the tables
Sorry,
on me.
I thought that was a softball. I'm sorry. Okay, well, we're gonna get to that then. Just
I guess it would be the one about not to sin against.
not to covet.
Covet
Number-
your neighbor's wife.
Exactly right. Number 10.
And
Yeah.
see, that's the thing, is that it says covet your neighbor's wife. It doesn't say covet your neighbor's husband.
Okay, well, women just, they
Picking on
don't
us
have an
again.
issue with it. It's
I
just
mean,
the men,
Doesn't
you know?
that,
But
Right.
what
But
I'm
there-
saying is that it's saying in the Ten Commandments that it's the husband.
Right. I mean, I think ultimately it is generic in the sense, but
Yeah.
I think it's more of the along the lines of, it was the patriarchal society, and that's how it was sort of represented and put in that fashion.
well, there's also the commandment not to commit adultery, so why wouldn't you use that one rather than covetousness? Oh, if you're saying that you're thinking
Covet
about.
is thinking,
Okay, yeah, well, Jesus said if you lust in your heart, then
Right.
you committed
Yeah.
adultery already.
You're right, quite right. In fact, okay, so there is, judge not that you not be judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So this is a standard that Jesus, you know, would use in judging people. And perhaps in their minds, they weren't guilty of the letter of the law, but they were certainly guilty of the spirit, In Matthew, in their question about divorce and remarriage, Matthew 19:3 and 7-9, who's gonna be up for that? John?
There was a hand raised over.
Yep, is there a question?
Oh, I was gonna say something, but, he said it.
Abby?
I was gonna say something, but he said it.
Okay, all right, in a moment. Okay, so the idea was that this idea of divorce and remarriage, because when you get down to it, listen to what Jesus' standard of adultery is. John?
Some Pharisees came to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?"
Okay, 7-9 now.
Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but this is not the way from the beginning.
And a little bit more.
I tell you that if anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness and marries another woman commits adultery."
That's Jesus' standard there, okay? I mean, we have to get down to true unfaithfulness. What was going on in Israel at this time, in Palestine, was they were just divorcing for the slightest of infractions. You know, it was a terrible time for a lot of women. You know, there's a story. You know, they burned their husband's toast, and they basically said, "We're divorcing." You know, and again, it was a patriarchal society and so forth. So they had no really legitimate reason for this stuff. But in particular, I think a lot of the Pharisees were doing this, and Jesus said, "No, no, no. If you do this, you marry somebody else, you are committing adultery." Moses allowed it for the hardness of heart, but it had nothing to do with this idea of for any and all reason, you know. Yeah. So they were certainly guilty of the lustful thoughts and just kind of dismissing a woman and marrying another. The 10th commandment, we talked about that momentarily ago. It's Exodus 20:17. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, not your neighbor's wife, his male servant or his female servant, or his ox or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's.
Exodus,
Neighbor
what was that?
obviously means everybody else, right?
Exodus what?
20 verse 17. That'll be in the notes, yeah. So, and also, and Paul had his own experience in Romans 7:7. What shall we then say? That the law is sin? By no means. Had it not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. The idea there was covet. I didn't ever broke the law, but when it said you shall not even covet, well, that just broke him, because that was even the desire to break the law is now guilty. They're guilty. So, at any rate, verse 9, when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. So he's just sort of continuing to write down until they all leave one by one, interesting order from the older ones down to the younger ones. And why do they leave? You know, again, part of that conviction, maybe the Holy Spirit was, you know, doing their conviction in them, but they all leave, and it's just Jesus and her, right? And 10 to 11, Jesus stood up and said to her, like, it's almost like he was surprised, like he's been, you know, stood up. Where'd everybody go? Where'd they all go? And he said, women, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She says, no one, Lord. Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more. So he's sort of, as I said, it's almost in a dispassionate way. Not that he doesn't care about it, but he's not going to be emotional about it in the sense that we might do that. And she finally said, this is the only thing she says to him, okay? And it's basically in total agreement with his statement. So she calls him Lord, and was that a recognition of Jesus' deity?
Yes. I think so.
Do you think so? Okay. Any reason? Do you know what?
Well, no, but.
I mean, just to call, because Lord was, it wasn't uncommon to use that to somebody out of respect.
Oh, I didn't, okay.
Yeah.
I
So-
see, probably not then.
I don't think it was. I personally don't think she recognized him for who he was, literally. I think this was just a case of a sir or a mister kind of a thing. They're all gone. She does, you know, when you look at her response, she did address him as, you know, she didn't address him as rabbi, a teacher, just a term of respect, like sir. So she finally Jesus finally answers the question to the Pharisees, what do you say? And it was simply, whoever can answer this question for me, whoever is without sin can cast the stone. Okay, well, there is the answer to the question there, but they're all gone. Nobody's there to listen to it.
Cindy's translation actually says sir.
Does it? Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So I think it is more appropriate to think of it as a term of respect than that as a recognition of deity.
Okay.
But part of it is that he was the only one left,
Yeah.
you know, so he was the only one without sin.
Yeah. Well,
But-
he wasn't going to stone her. I
No,
mean,
he wasn't.
Right.
He never planned on it.
He never said. He never
But
said.
what did it leave to the
The
other
impression.
people that she walked away because no one stoned her?
Yeah, did they think that Jesus had
Is
sinned?
Jesus with sin because he didn't stone her?
Well,
But we
I mean-
know what he said to her.
He wasn't a witness.
but There was no witness.
Yeah, he wasn't the witness.
There was no more witnesses. Okay.
To condemn her.
Nobody else to condemn him. Okay.
Okay,
In that sense, yeah, very good point.
okay, that makes much.
It's not that he didn't know.
Right.
And we
Yeah,
find
he
out from
wasn't.
his response, it certainly alludes to the fact that he did know, but he wasn't going to be the judge right there. Okay, that awaited a later time. Right?
And it's funny because sometimes when he healed people, he said sin no more.
Yeah, well, we saw that in John chapter 5. Remember the invalid? He said, go and sin no more lest something worse happen to you, okay? So when you look at this, he doesn't condemn her, and he addresses her as woman. Remember, it's the same word that he used with his mother and with the woman at the well. It's sort of a term somewhat endearing, the idea of dear lady kind of a thing. It wasn't, you know, he didn't insult her, you dirty little rotten, you know,
Right.
and just insult her. Don't expect me to bail you out again and ever again like this, you know. There was nothing like that in the way that he treated her, of course. And, you know, how could he be so stupid to get, I can think of all kinds of things, probably won't want to say. But it is striking, he does not condemn her, he just does, we're not told her name, okay? Does she ever even show remorse?
It doesn't tell you.
It doesn't.
And it doesn't sound like it.
I kind of agree with you, Shep. It doesn't seem like she's repentant, as we might want to expect to see something like that, right? There's just no recognition of the sin. I mean, she doesn't respond. No more after Jesus says, sin no more, basically she doesn't say, okay, got the message, let me go, kind of a thing. It's,
That doesn't mean that she wasn't.
Right.
We still don't have the full story here because this is not.
You're absolutely correct. All we have is this portion in here.
Yeah.
So there's more to the story, I guess. But all we can
It's
tell
sort of
is.
like the leopards, you know, that there were 10 leopards and only one came back.
Yeah.
Well,
You know.
you know,
I think she was
they
humbled by
wanted to
Jesus.
make sure you knew that part of it, but it doesn't, this doesn't tell you what her response was.
Got so
It
close
just,
to being stoned.
that's it.
That's it, right. Well, she certainly said, sir, no one's condemned me. No one's left. That's all we know. She left.
Leopards.
Yeah, I bet.
The No,
No,
the,
First,
No, the ones
Yes.
that had the swords.
Okay, so, real quick,
Sorry.
I'm gonna wrap up on this, because I know
Sorry.
wonderful discussion here. But Jesus' earthly ministry was not to condemn sinners, but to save them, right? Why, I have a question. Does it seem like Jesus gave her the gospel?
Not
Why
in
not?
this-
Yeah, it just seems to be missing there. You know, again, it's just part of what we have to deal with here. It wasn't meant to be put in here.
What does that question mean? There's a lot of, like, even with the blind man, like, Jesus didn't give maybe the gospel to a lot of people.
Correct, not in the way that we would
Wasn't his
understand it, right, but say Nicodemus, or
Yeah.
more like the woman at the well,
Yeah.
or somebody like that, where it's more clear. That's what I'm talking about. He's just right, he doesn't do it all the time,
Yeah.
but he does it sometimes. You know, this would be like, wouldn't this be the perfect time? Okay, that's all I'm getting at. Okay, but like so many others, we don't hear the later outcome. You know, maybe Jesus was softening the target for later, later appointment. So I'll sum up with Herman Ritterboss's quick assessment here. With good reason, despite its uncertain provenance, that's its origins of the story, this story has been called a pearl of great price. The masterful simplicity of the story reflects the unique manner in which the gospel is brought to expression by Jesus by silencing with a word or a gesture the curse of a law torn from its base and reestablishing justice on the foundation of his grace. Any other questions or comments?